Welcome back to Celebrity Radio. It's Alex Belfield talking to some of my favourite people, some of the country's biggest stars and exceptional people too. There's a brand new album out called Cilla with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, and it is just perfect. It's authorised and approved by Cilla's son, Robert Willis. How are you?
I'm really well, Alex. Thank you for having me.
You gave me one of the greatest days of my life. Do you know that?
Well, yeah. I've got a vague memory. Was that when I hooked you up with my late mother? Is that right? And you guys had a... Yeah.
You finally got round to allowing me the great privilege of going to our home and sitting down for an hour with your mum for the BBC, and it was one of the most popular hours I ever did for them. She was so loved. She was so popular. She was such a classy star. There are no stars like that today. What a thrill to have Cilla as your mum.
Yeah, I mean, she was definitely a real character, and she did love being a star. You know, she came from that era, growing up and aspiring to be, a singer initially, and then obviously she got into telly afterwards. But she definitely was from that old school that she definitely aspired to being that sort of special person, and amazingly she was. Yeah, she was great.
And you know how I know she was a star?
Go on, tell me.
Well, there's one main reason you can tell a star is a star. It's when you get in a lift, and when you get to the top, the lift opens into their front room. That's when you know they're a star.
Yeah, that and Bond villains, I guess, yeah.
Tell me about what it was like growing up. I mean, your mum was so popular, but more importantly, so busy. How much of a mum was she able to be when she was at the height of her fame? Because, of course, juggling 3 kids and show business at that level must have been virtually impossible.
We knew we were loved. I think that's the key thing with kids. And we had that security in the sense that, we lived in the same house. We didn't move, so that was consistent. We were lucky that we had a nanny, Penny, who was still with us, actually. Well, with us, she's now part of the family, but she became my mother's housekeeper after nannying the 3 of us. So we had that consistency and the knowledge that we were loved, and we understood that, they both worked, obviously. So if they were away, they were both away. And so, but we knew it was for us, so there was never any kind of sense that we missed out on anything. In fact, we were very lucky to have experienced the experiences that we had, TV studios and theatres. They're very glamorous, but obviously we saw the other side of that as well. But it was all cool, all very interesting and fascinating to be able to see how telly, theatre and radio all work, and the wonderful people that work in those mediums, because they were very, and they still are, it's the creative arts, that you get a great bunch of people there who are a lot of fun to be around.
I asked the same question this time last week when the lovely Terry, who's through the glass through there, set up an interview with Roy Orbison Jr., and it's such an elite club of children of stars at that level. The people who pass through your door, I mean, you must have met everybody, and having them around the Sunday table for lunch must have just been absolutely ordinary.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, at the end of the day, people are just people, regardless of what they do.
Well, you say that, but some are more famous and some are richer than others. That's the difference, isn't it, I suppose?
Well, I guess.
And more interesting.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, I think the thing is that, and I mean, Frankie Howard would invite himself over, so he was like Uncle Frankie to us and all of that. But I mean, we don't, you don't necessarily as a kid buy into all of that, the trappings of it. You can see it from the outside, but from a kid's perspective, people are just people, and you don't necessarily, as I say, get over kind of, the glamour of it is, you see through the glamour of it. Having said that, I was a big Bond fan, and Roger Moore was our next door neighbour. I remember as a kid, we went over there, and I think he'd just done Man with the Golden Gun, and I think I had a little spark gun. I don't think you can get those anymore. And I must have been about, 4 or 5 or whatever, and I went over with my mum, and I tried to shoot James Bond with my spark gun. I was so happy that I did. I don't know what it says about me, actually, wanting to kill James Bond, but anyway, I was very pleased I managed to do what everyone else had failed to do. He just laughed and sort of, just sort of like, when we kind of, anyway, so yeah. But I was good mates with Roger's kids as well, and all the Bond guys, the Saltzmans and those guys all grew up in Denham, and so, there was very much, but we didn't necessarily, you didn't really think too much about it. You just judge people as people, and that's essentially something that you have to do and not don't buy into the glamour of it, because it's kind of superficial in some respects. That thing. People are just people at the end of the day. No matter.
I get that. I meant it more from sort of a genius point of view. When you're around somebody like Frankie, who probably was one of the greatest wits, although flawed in many ways, to be around that sort of person has got to influence you, your humour, your personality, and also your communication skills. These are people at the top of their game, aren't they?
They are, and he was a dear family friend, and he was someone who was very perceptive, about things. But you just, but the thing is that people have a kind of an on-screen thing, and then you have the sort of private thing, and more often than not, it's the same person. It might be slightly toned down a bit, but I guess with kids, Frankie was all right. We loved him coming down. He was very funny, and he used to have us in stitches. But he was just like Uncle Frankie to us. It was one of those, things we didn't really. We had mum and dad had other friends as well. They were great, and they weren't on telly or on the theatre or whatever. But yes, so we did have an eclectic mix of different friends of my folks. But I think, as they kind of. They actually were quite private people, and at the weekends they just preferred it to be the family. Ultimately, you'd have these things occasionally, but more often than not, for them, they kind of had done with all the showbiz thing and just did the work, and then got home and had a normal weekend, cooked a Sunday lunch, and had to give us a normal thing. So we were quite lucky in so much as that, we had a taste of that, but they didn't want us to sort of grow up in that environment, because it's. They'd done it all, before they had kids. And I think when they went out to Denham, it was more about settling down and doing family things as opposed to indulging in that showbiz circuit, which, as I said, is can be quite a superficial and ultimately not a healthy thing if you get too into it,
I do think your mum had the best days of show business. The scale that she achieved, the success was so remarkable. Last year I went to see the musical, and now there's this new album. I mean, it's done so beautifully. It's been done before with Elvis and Roy, and they just do a terrific job of giving these songs a new life. And the sound of your mum's voice, it's almost never been better. How tricky was it to get those original cuts of your mum's voice to put on top of the orchestra?
Well, we had the original masters, so we were able to strip away all the rest of the original orchestration, and then obviously we kept it, and then you bring it back into the mix. But because it was so beautiful, with the late Sir George Martin, some of his arrangements and the orchestration on the original tracks was incredible. But what you could do once you're able to isolate the vocal is to mix it slightly different, so it's a bit more prominent in the mix. But it sounds so fresh. I mean, she was obviously so young, those early tracks, and she had such a strong and distinctive voice, and also the softer voice that she developed as she sort of progressed. It was lovely to hear it, isolated like that. And when they were recording it, when the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic were recording it at the Friary, they it was like she was next door. It was weird in a good way, that you could have this sort of freshness. And again, James and Juliet, the producers, then brought in other elements of the original tracks and brought them back into the mix. But that's kind of how you do it. And some tracks, obviously, it's easier to do it with than others. But, they persevered with it. And the technology now to do that is incredible, because you couldn't really do that before unless you actually had the isolated master, which we had in some of the ones, but the other ones we had to use the wonders of technology to get it isolated.
So clever, and it's a joy of an album. Cilla with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra is out now. I remember sat here that Sunday that the news broke that your mum was no longer with us. Were even you overwhelmed by the reaction? I mean, it was remarkable how the country reacted, and the love and the warmth. Yeah,
it was. It was an amazing tribute, at the time. Obviously, you're just in the middle of it all, dealing with it, and it was incredibly comforting to see how many people she had touched, and all the different ages, and it was phenomenal, really, actually, and incredibly comforting at the time when, you're going through some pretty intense stuff. So it was the fact that she was held in such high esteem and there was so much warmth and love generated towards her was incredibly comforting to me and my brothers at that time, yeah.
You're following on from your dad's legacy because he had her back. Everybody knew he was the gatekeeper. He protected her. He loved her. He was the life and soul of Cilla Black and her career. And you took over that. That was a great privilege too, because she absolutely trusted you and you did a great job keeping her in the right place, doing the right things. I know your mum had her own mind, but sort of TV had changed at that point, hadn't it? It had become more reality driven, and the days were very different.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that their plan, as it were, was to retire together, and so and not keep going on. I'm sure she would have done bits and bobs, but their plan was to sort of stop when she was 60, financially, and everything was geared towards that. And so when he died and he was 57 and she was 56, all the plans that they'd sort of been aiming towards had kind of obviously changed. And so her kind of attitude to work and to kind of fill the void that, losing, someone like my dad, it affected us all deeply, obviously. And then, I was proud that I was able to, with my brothers and obviously with her dear friends, to give her that sort of stability so she could not reinvent, but just basically kind of weather the initial couple of years in order to then, get through it and define and recreate a life for herself where she was happy again, and she was,
She confessed to me that she was the reason that Paul O'Grady had his first 2 heart attacks. She loved a party, and let's not forget, she was probably one of the most fun people who ever existed in show business.
Yeah, she was. I mean, she started doing all these things that my dad would never have approved of, and I guess that was part of the healing process. That's what I mean. Paul was wonderful with her. At that time, obviously, he was a hellraiser, probably not so much now, but you never know. He's still got the devil in him. But they were, and they just connected. They both just connected on that level. They had fun and they were funny together, and they got into these situations which which they didn't intend to, but they were always very funny. And so he was great in so much as that he looked after her as well, because at the end of the day, I was. My sort of late night clubbing days. I mean, I was married. I'm having kids. I'm not going to be going out to clubs till 3 or 4 in the morning. But so thank God she had someone like Paul. It would look after her, because there was a side to her that was still, a little bit vulnerable, because she'd been, as you say, so well protected and very much the emphasis was on a very domesticated thing. And then when she got over after a couple of years, she came to terms with a lot of things, and she started doing things that, you would never have thought she'd be doing, traveling on her own, going to this, going to that, flying here and there, and going out and raising all sorts of, which I didn't want to know about. If it didn't get in the newspapers, that's fine. I didn't want to know. And she wouldn't tell me anyway. But but as I said, my relationship was obviously different. We became sort of friends, and I could give her advice, and you could try and make her think it was her idea. I guess that was the trick, to get her to agree with you. But at the end of the day, I just wanted her to be happy, and that she'd achieved so much, and she was totally cool financially. So it was more about what was sort of making her happy in terms of work or not working, or just living her life. Because they had planned, as I said, to kind of have this kind of early-ish retirement and go and travel and do the sort of things that you can't do when you're raising kids and building a portfolio, but they... Robert,
thank you so much for the opportunity to meet Cilla. I met her a couple of times, but to go into her home and talk to her about her life and what a life it was an extremely, incredibly wonderful thing. It was the only thing that ever impressed my dad, interestingly. He loved your mum. Robert Willis, thank you so much for your time. Cilla with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra is out now. It's a glorious celebration of Cilla Black's voice. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.